Hey everyone, this is Steve Weintraub with Collider, and I'm here with the good folks behind Captive State. How are you guys doing?
Very well, thanks. Good to see you.
The only reason that Collider gets to be here is because we have some awesome sponsors. South by Southwest is what we call expensive to cover. Mm-hmm. So I just want to give a huge thank you to all of our sponsors, which you can see here on our table. I'm a big fan of the tequila that's right there. I had a margarita yesterday, and this is off the rails, but it was really good.
Do you want to try some,
El
Darren?
Tesoro,
yeah, El Tesoro.
Never too early.
But by the way, it was real good, and I'm not just saying that as like because they're our sponsor.
Yeah.
Like the margarita was legit.
Nice.
I'm off the rails. I'm so sorry. It's early in the morning. So before we get into Captive State, I definitely want to. I'm a fan of your work, and I've been waiting. Like, you've been attached to a few things that just didn't go, and as a fan, I am curious before we get into Captive State. So what exactly happened? I have to start with what happened with Gambit. And then you were on Halo for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, look, it happens often with projects, unfortunately, which there's any number of reasons. I mean, Gambit was ultimately, I'll be honest about it. Fantastic Four came out, did not do very well for Fox. They decided to lower our budget. We were 12 weeks out. We couldn't recover. The script needed a huge amount of rewriting in order to fit that budget, and ultimately, powers that be chose not to go down that road. So the film didn't happen. Sorry. I should know better. And then, of course, whatever happened after me with other directors, I have no idea. What I do know is that Channing Tatum and his producing partner, Reed Caronan, had an amazing idea of what that movie was going to be, and Josh Sedema, the writer, as well. It was terrific. I mean, it was really exciting, kind of a sort of Godfather with mutants set in the world of New Orleans with different gangs. And
if I'm not mistaken, it was going to be like a heist movie.
Yeah, of a sort. I mean, it was a period film. It dealt with the 70s up until the present day, and it was about kind of mutant gangs and the notion of what it means to belong, tribalism in this sort of bayou-like sort of environment and swamps of New Orleans. So it would have been a lot of fun. I don't know. I know that Channing sort of worked on the script to make it into more of a romantic comedy, I think, which I read, and it was great. It was very different to what I was involved in. But now Disney have the reins, so I don't know what their plans are.
It's so interesting to me because I never viewed, for me as an outsider, and I'm so sorry, we're going to get into Captive State, but I've never viewed Gambit as such a strong character to carry his own movie that I was always wondering, because I heard what the budget was going to be, and it was well over $100 million, or it wasn't.
No.
Oh, the one you were going to make.
Yeah.
Oh, well, then I'm completely.
Yeah. I think I read that too. Someone said it was 150 million. It was not.
Oh, okay. No. So that's even more surprising to me then, because the superhero genre, Fantastic Four was an anomaly. Generally speaking, the superhero genre is the most popular on the planet. So it seems like no matter what the movie is, it performs. It's crazy.
It was a really good script too. Some of those movies can sort of be ultimately be impressive, but not be built on a story, and that one was good.
Yeah, Josh's script was great.
Yeah.
I mean, look, this is probably getting in the weeds too much, but it is interesting to talk about. It's like invariably what happens with that kind of process of filmmaking, if people don't have their ducks in the row, is they'll throw it at the wall, they'll then realize it's not sticking, and they'll then spend the $150 million to get it right. Now, as a filmmaker, I've been through that process, and it's really hard to then end up with a piece of work that actually functions and has a cohesive story to it. And I think, we were in a place, both Channing, me, Reed, the producers, where we didn't want to have to go through that experience. We wanted to, set out to make a particular film and deliver on that. And
sure.
And so, the whole process of reshoots and all of that stuff, we didn't want to go down that road.
It's interesting. I've spoken to a lot of filmmakers. Like it happened with Chris McQuarrie on the Mission movie, on I think both Mission movies, but especially the recent one where the production halfway through, Tom broke his ankle. They had to stop, and he was able to go in the editing room, see all the footage they had, and continue writing, and see what they needed and what it was working. And then, the movie's spectacular, But one of the reasons, even Chris will say, is because we had that break in the middle where I could look at everything. And I so wish more films had the ability and budget to take like 2 weeks in the middle and just look at everything.
Isn't that the Japanese? Is that where?
It's an Asian.
Yeah, they do it that way often.
Why he does that as a filmmaker? I mean, a lot of Asian filmmakers do it. Woody Allen does it. I mean, it's you shoot a bit, you stand down. You know, it's. We were talking about this with a friend of ours the other day, who's an independent filmmaker who's just made this really interesting film about Ted Kaczynski, and he's shot it over an entire year. Like, shot a little bit, stopped. You know, and what it's allowed him to do is understand the movie and cut things, try things out, rewrite, and the studio system doesn't really allow for that because it costs $200,000 a day to be on a studio set.
The other thing is that I think that often in the studio format, there's so much on the line that they don't allow, a single creative mind to drive that process. So there's sort of focus groups and lots of people who come in, and it feels like it's more of a panic situation where they're, spending the money at the end to sort of Band-Aid over problems instead of...
The other thing is, it's a changing landscape out there right now, but, when you're aiming at all 4 quadrants, you're not going to hit any.
Right.
You want to aim at the audience. And I want to get into Halo, but let's jump into Captive State. So I got to... No, just because it's a good tangent, because this is my kind of movie. Like, I really enjoyed the film, and I'm a big fan of sci-fi, and this is like... you're aiming at me. You're not aiming at 4 quadrants with this movie. Like, you hit me dead center, and I'm like, fuck yes. You know what I mean? Right. So one of the things is, and I think it's important to say this is not some $100 million movie. This was made clearly on a budget. And so talk a little bit about you guys putting this thing together for a budget and what you wanted to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think you're right, and this shouldn't be a $100 million movie. I think it would have been wholly inappropriate to make a film like this for that amount of money, because you're right, it's not diluting certain choices in order to appeal to as many people as possible. That said, we as filmmakers love to tell stories for an audience. There's a reason why in a cinema there is stadium seating. The idea of getting as many people to come to witness a story and be part of the storytelling is massively appealing. We're not making it for a chosen few, but there are tropes to storytelling, both in particular in genre, that the hero's journey, for example, that people in the mainstream have a tendency to want to follow and have an expectation, especially with a film like this, that's how it's going to play out. So, there's many other aspects to this film, but as an example, we've told an ensemble story. It's a hyper narrative. We follow multiple characters through this one landscape. And we don't necessarily, therefore, have a protagonist, a set protagonist. We leave what we think is our protagonist behind for 25 minutes whilst we go off and follow other characters that are all part of the same story. And I think that's really exciting to be able to do, but it's really something that you can only really do when you have a creative freedom, I think.
And speaking for myself, I'm not necessarily a straight down the line genre person. The aspect of genre that really interests me is subverting genre or, doing something different with genre. So definitely when we were working on this together, that was sort of always my approach.
As I was saying, you guys made this obviously on a budget. Talk a little bit about the importance of finding where that you can actually, quote unquote, spend the money. Do you know what I mean? Because when you have only so much of it, you have to pinpoint what are the shots that I really need to show an alien, or at least that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this film, we were incredibly lucky because it rarely happens and it may never happen again. But the idea of being able to write a script, put it in front of a few people, and they go, "Yeah, we want to make that film too," and then being able to go out and make it is a rare situation, and we were in that situation with this film, and when participants said, yes, we would like to make this film with you, we were in pre-production 2-3 months later. Now, the great thing about that is the momentum is immense. The challenging thing is getting the film ready on time and being able to really prepare and plan. And I'd say that, preparation is everything. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier about having time to shoot, time to really kind of work in multiple locations rather than building everything on a stage. which probably gives you more shooting time, but aesthetically changes the nature of the film. And for us, we wanted this to be grounded. So we have over 40 locations in this film. We have 100 speaking parts. We were traveling around Chicago in the middle of winter with a pretty stripped down unit for a film of this ambition, in order to sort of try and give it a scale that is grounded and plausible.
Well, I think also just, to speak to your process, if I may, say how it is for you, that I think you approach sort of everything from the indie sensibility that, you had from the very beginning that you've kind of come up with, which is it really matters to you how you spend the money and you really think about that. And so, endless conversations, I've heard him have or had on things like this where it's like, can you achieve the same dramatic impact from a close-up, of somebody's face and a sound effect of a giant explosion, or do you need to actually blow up the building? And oftentimes you can get the same impact from the close-up on someone's face and the sound effect. And if you can do that, then in some ways that's like a more of a creative achievement, if that makes sense, or it feels good to really, pick your moments.
Yeah.
I was going to say one of the things about this is having certain actors in key roles really matters because it pulls you and makes it. Basically where I'm going at is I'm a huge John Goodman fan, and so having him in this movie and his performance and it really carries a lot of weight. Yeah. So what was the secret of getting him? Was he gung ho? What was that initial meeting like?
Have you ever met him?
Yes, I have actually.
Okay. Did you remember?
Yeah, he was very. When I saw him, he was loud and very there.
Yeah, he's really interesting, John, because he's a contradiction. He can be very shy and retiring and quiet, and then he can be very ebullient and bombastic and big, and it's the same across all aspects of his personality, I think, and it's what makes him a really interesting actor, I think. He sort of has a sort of a constant kind of, he travels emotionally a lot, and so but it's stripped down. He's an actor's actor. He's very straightforward. He works to his gut and his instincts. So I worked with him on The Gambler just for a couple of days actually, and so we really not got to know each other that well, but I personally really enjoyed working with him, and he came in and kind of knocked it out of the park basically with this 10-page monologue, and he was very sort of amenable and up for doing different things and trying different things. And I think the scene actually in The Gambler was set in a sports bar, and we said, well, let's put you in a spa, because I just saw at the time he was a much larger man than he is now, and I thought this mountain of a man would be kind of amazing visually in this spa with a towel around his neck and sweating heavily, and his presence was magnificent. And many actors would have gone, nope, not going to do that. And he went for it and loved it. And so I went back to him with this. When we were working on the character, we wanted to develop this idea of a man full of contradictions. He's on the one hand a man who believes in law and order, but on another hand, he's a collaborator. He's a man who's morally bankrupt, who's doing very bad things and seen very bad things. He's a man who goes to see a prostitute, yet at the same time, he has this clearly very genuine relationship with her and genuine feelings for her. So I needed an actor that you could sort of in a way project many things onto, and you're not necessarily going to say he's our antagonist or he's our protagonist. And there's not many of his stature that can do that. That's why he's a character actor more than a movie star, even though he is also a movie star, if you know what I mean.
Completely. Yeah. Ultimately, the editing room is the final rewrite. I'm curious how things changed in the editing room, and did you show the movie to people, get feedback, and are like, oh my God, I can't believe we missed that?
I mean, just to say this, I felt so lucky to be doing this with him, because often as the writer, you don't get to be involved in all of those aspects of the process. So to really sort of, as you said, be involved in not only the initial writing, but the rewriting through the editing was such a pleasure.
Yeah, and I feel like and massively helpful to me as well, to have my writer in the room with my editor, working with our editor Andrew Groves and even our DP Alex Dissenhoff. I mean, every aspect, and that's the great thing about making a film at this scale, is everyone is coming at it from quite a sort of sort of altruistic sensibility. Everyone's sort of united under this notion of making the very best film possible. and that's not to say when you're working on bigger budgets, people don't feel that, but invariably it's a job, it's a finite job, and you then move on to the next thing. Whereas this was a vocation for many of us, and so to be able to sit in a room with our backers, with the studio, with the filmmakers, and kind of honestly say that's working, this is not working, and we need to fix it. And so, yeah, there was a lot that changed in the edit. But from the first film I made, The Escapist, I remember Joe Walker, the editor of that film, he and I completely rewrote the film in the edit in many ways. Structurally, we really started to change things on a wall because it wasn't working. And there was the same with this in many ways. We had to sort of refine it.
And also because the plot is quite complex and it hinges on the audience, being aware of certain things but not being aware of other things. And there's always that question of, are you giving them too much so they're way ahead of you, or you're not giving them enough and they're going, I don't know what the hell is going on. And so it was really important to show the movie too. We sort of had this brain trust of people in Hudson where we live, and would come and screen it for them and have them say, I don't get that, or I think this, and you realize, it's so important to get that kind of feedback to say, okay, we think we're saying something here that is not happening yet.
Yeah.
Or
we also had test screenings as well, which is a whole other story. But they're valid for sure.
Well, something that's interesting is that I've heard a lot of filmmakers say that they hate the test screening process, and I've heard other filmmakers that they revere it because ultimately, when you've seen it 1,000 times, you've lost all perspective. You have to show it into an audience.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But if the question is that test screening full of, as you said, if it's not a 4-quadrant movie,
exactly,
that's always the issue. So if you get a bunch of yous in the test screening and you're sort of talking to people who are your audience, that's great. If you get quadrant 3 and you're in quadrant 1.
There was an actor I worked with once who actually put his finger on it, where he said, test screening is a little bit like everyone sitting around a table with a bottle of wine and tasting that wine, and everyone's going to have a different opinion about how that wine tastes. But if you add water and you add more and more water, everyone's eventually going to say it tastes the same. No, and you can dilute a film as a result of that.
Very true.
But what I would say, and I think that's where test scoring I have my problems with, in terms of putting it to a random audience, I think there's a lot to be got from people's feedback, because of course there are going to be some who are in line with your thinking, and there are going to be others that are totally out there. But if 5 people tell you you're drunk, then you're drunk. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of.
Well, I think it's also important. Like if the question is, did you have confusion about this scene, and and everyone says no, or if everyone says yes, well then you have an answer there. But listen, I agree, and I think that ultimately, you guys made this on a budget. So it's not like you're aiming at 4 quadrants, and I think that's the key. I think it's when movies are made for $200 million, that's a whole different beast.
Right, but Neil Blomkamp's District 9, I think, was made on a not dissimilar budget, and ultimately, went global in terms of its reach and its box office. So I'm not suggesting for a second that we're going to be following in those footsteps, but I think there's an opportunity if you can do something that people tap into in the moment, and is a little bit different. And I would say that as a sci-fi, we're dealing with an alien occupation, not an invasion. With that in itself is a different approach to things. But also just tonally, you find the right groove at the particular moment in time that the film comes out. I think you can get a swell of support that goes beyond your core audience, and that's what we always hope for. Whether that happens, who knows? Totally.
I also think that nowadays so many people watch things, and it's important to realize so many people watch things when it's streaming now. Mm-hmm. It's just a different world. As I'm and I know you guys must be. For me, the movie theater is like the church, the temple. The idea of watching it at home is not for me, but that's where a lot of people watch it on their phones.
On their phones,
I know.
It's like this big.
Yeah. It's crazy.
I know.
Before I run out of time, I totally have to just real quick. So what happened with Halo? Because I was so excited to see your take on this.
I'm still excited. I mean, I think, look, I mean, in a nutshell, to sort of put it in as succinct a way as possible, I got involved. I knew very little about Halo, same way as I knew very little about Planet of the Apes, actually, when I got involved. And I kind of steeped myself in the mythology and began to realize how much incredible literature there was and the depth of the storytelling. And it all stacked up for me. There was an incredible foundation to the storytelling. So I was gangbusters. I was super excited. In short, I think if I had sort of come at it from an earlier perspective in the building of it, then perhaps it would have gone differently. But as a director of a TV show, it's quite hard to sort of, in a way, become a creative architect of a show. And I think, in a way, I was never going to be that. And that's fine, because there are really many talented people involved in that show who are doing that job. And so it became clear that there was going to be more time needed, and I'm talking, some months, if not years, to align. As you probably know, it's massively ambitious, so the budget for that needs to really align with the scripts. And we were still kind of working on that, but it ultimately wasn't under my watch to be able to find that alignment. So there was a choice made by Showtime, which was essentially to push things. And if I had been perhaps the showrunner of the film, then I would have stayed on that journey for 2-3 years. But as a director of a finite number of episodes, there's other things I really want to do. So I was very sad to have to leave, but basically it wasn't within the framework that I'd originally signed up for.
Completely. I was going to say, one of the things about Halo is, as a fan, it's such an interesting and cool world that I think is one of those rare things that I actually think will work. I think as a series, like an 8 or 10 episode. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of the 8 or 10 episode season, and I think Halo is like one of those perfect things that if you do it right and you have the budget and you have the right story to tell each year, you can. I mean, this could be something cool, and it has a cool title.
Yeah.
That's all you need, really.
But no, I mean, a cool title is really important.
Captive State. There you go. Yeah,
exactly.
It does many things.
But by the way, something nowadays, and I say this all the time to people: if you have a bad title, what are you thinking? It's like if you have people, it's like going to a website. You have like a millisecond to get a reaction.
Yeah.
So like, if you have a bad title, I'm like, what? You're done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we've all been in the cinema where you've seen a trailer and gone, "Oh, that's kind of interesting," and then the title comes up and
it's
you hear the air go out of the room.
It's the same thing with kids' names. You got to be really careful with that, because man, if you whiff that at the beginning, your kid is screwed.
Right. I got my parents went with Steve. I was fucked. Right. You know what I mean?
I wasn't calling
choice,
that like
it's
the
good.
worst one ever, but I mean, Hildegard or something like that. It's like, God, you better be cool if you're called Hildegard.
Right. Before one of my last things, like I said, I am a fan of your work, and so what's cooking? I believe you have something. I wrote it down. Oh man, what did I write? I wrote down something. Storm King.
Storm King.
Is that actually going? What are you working on next?
Yeah, so we're writing Storm King. It's for Jeff Robinoff at Studio 8, who used to be the guy running for Warner Brothers, and he really interesting studio guy, and really into kind of similar to Captive State, kind of putting out original pieces of work within the genre realm, and I think that's really exciting. 10 years ago, those were dying on the vine. There were not many around, and I think streaming has begun to bring back the middle budget movie, but there's still that space in the theatrical world to be making those films. And I speaking for myself, and I think for both of us, it's incredibly fortunate that we have that opportunity, whether we have it in 5-10 years from now, where all cinema becomes either franchise or heavily independent filmmaking. The middle ground movie is that rare beast, and so Storm King is that for sure.
Can you say what it's about, or?
It's a gauntlet story. I'm a massive fan of Walter Hill.
And why wouldn't you be?
Who would not be a massive fan of Walter Hill? Yeah. I think he's incredibly underrated. Well, he's not underrated. He's actually rated as he should be. But I love his form of storytelling, where he's doing something with genre, but ultimately telling the story from the human perspective. And that's certainly what Storm King's intending to be. But it's set in a world that is not unlike ours, but that much different. And it's a gauntlet film. I've always wanted to tell a story about the coming together of a team to carry off one single event, and it's that.
I'm very, very curious. You gave me a little, but not a lot. I'm always like, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, we're still figuring it out.
Does it have to do with like a hurricane? Because it has storm? I'll leave it be. I don't want to make you.
That's the mystery. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to get you in trouble. My last thing, getting back into Captive State. Did you, with a finite budget, you obviously can only shoot so much. But did you have a much longer first cut? Do you have a lot of deleted scenes, or is it pretty much on the screen?
So much. I mean, Rupert was just saying the other day, and it's so true. They shot, he shot so quickly, and they shot so much. And I mean, hindsight is 20/20. But if there were more time to spend on some of the things that ended up there, and less time spent on many things that didn't. But at the same time, as we said, with a story this complicated,
that's part of the process.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of when we wrote the scripts, we knew we were always going to be looking at creating an ambitious story from multiple perspectives, a hyper narrative, following one character into the space of another, leaving that character behind, following the next character, and ultimately creating this spider's web. And the challenge with that is allowing the audience to not only sort of immerse themselves in the story, but also empathize with the characters and understand the plot. And in particular, it was the first act that we had to do the most work in post, because we needed to get the engine of the story going with all these different characters and jumping around. As an audience member, you're having to really follow what's going on. But once the engine sort of kicks in and the second act happens, and in the case of our film, the heist, as it were, starts to kick off, that's where we felt like the film started to lift off. And so it was finding the best way possible to tell the story in the beginning, the architecture of the story. And that's probably where we had the most scenes sort of cut or shift.
Yeah, because it's hard to set up so many characters, and you feel like you're sort of starting and then starting and then starting and then starting.
Yeah. I always tell people, if you want to see if you've never seen Cloud Atlas, which I think is a masterpiece, the opening.
Me too. I love that film.
Why wouldn't you love that film?
Well, there are people who don't.
They're all idiots. The opening 15 minutes is so dense with character, but once you see it a second time, which you shouldn't have to do, but it's so dense that the second time you see it, man, that movie is brilliant.
Yeah.
I just want to bring up Cloud Atlas anytime I can. So I'm sorry.
I think. I mean, I found it a profound movie watching experience. It was sort of
a masterpiece.
Religious in terms of like every aspect of it. There's aspects of it that are quite arch, but that's classic Wachowski sort of tone in many ways. But like the music, the Tom Twyker music in it is just sublime.
I need to end the interview with you, but I could talk about Cloud Atlas for like 2 hours. I mean, seriously, the movie's amazing. Congrats on Captive State. I'm so happy you guys got to come in our studio. Thank you again to our sponsors, to Supper Suite, and to everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Cheers. Thanks, Steve.